I used to believe that if you worked hard and stayed quiet, the world would eventually be fair to you. My name is Thomas. My father was a stone mason, a man who believed that a person's character was built one brick at a time. He taught me that a man's hands tell the true story of his life, and mine were covered in the permanent stain of iron dust, deep calluses, and scars from years of heavy lifting. For 15 years, I was the heart and soul of Sterling Heights construction. I wasn't just a foreman, I was the ghost in the machine. I knew every bolt, every beam, and every secret of the skyscrapers that defined this city's skyline. I didn't just build luxury offices for people I'd never meet, I built safety. I showed up at 4 every morning, long before the sun even thought about rising, just to check the cranes and the harnesses. I did it because I wanted every single worker on my site to go home to their family at night. I lived in a small, cramped apartment, saved every penny I earned for my daughter's heart surgery, and took pride in being the man people could count on when things got dangerous. Then came Maria. She was the CEO's daughter, a woman who had never stepped in a muddy puddle in her entire life, let alone walked a construction site during a storm. When her father retired and she took over the company, the soul of Sterling Heights died instantly. She didn't see human beings, she saw rows on a spreadsheet. To her, a worker wasn't a man with a family, he was just a machine that cost too much in insurance and wages. She would walk through the construction mud in designer heels that cost more than my first truck, looking at us like we were insects she wanted to crush under her feet. She wanted everything built faster, cheaper, and flashier. She didn't care about the foundation, she only cared about the gold plating on the front door. The first time Maria showed me who she really was happened during the Horizon Tower project. This was supposed to be the crown jewel of the city. I had spent 6 months of my own time staying up late by the light of a single desk lamp, developing a new kind of reinforced bracing system. It was designed to save the company millions in steel costs while making the building 3 times safer during a major earthquake. It was my masterpiece. I brought the blueprints to her top-floor office, my heart pounding with hope. I thought this was the moment I'd finally get the bonus I needed to pay for my daughter's surgery. She didn't even ask me to sit down. She looked at my life's work for maybe 5 seconds, her eyes cold and bored. Then, with a flick of her wrist, she tossed the entire roll of papers into her trash can. She told me that a child could have designed something so basic, and that I should go back to the dirt where I belonged. 2 weeks later, at a massive company gala, I stood in the shadows and watched her unveil the Maria Sterling Innovation System. It was my design line for line, bolt for bolt. She took a $500,000 bonus and a standing ovation, while I stood there with an empty wallet and a broken spirit. When I tried to talk to her afterward, she just laughed. She asked me who the world would believe, a CEO with an Ivy League degree or a man who smelled like wet cement and old sweat. But the theft was just the beginning. Maria's real specialty was cruelty. As the months went on, she started cutting the safety budget to pad her own bank account. She began ordering cheap rusted cables from overseas and told the crew to make it work. I told her it was a death trap. I walked into her office one afternoon, holding a photo of my daughter in her hospital bed. I wanted to show her why safety mattered, that these workers were fathers and husbands. Maria didn't even blink. She picked up the photo with 2 fingers, looking at my sick child with a look of pure disgust. She sneered and said that maybe if I were a more productive employee, God wouldn't have cursed me with such a broken child. Then, she dropped the photo into a puddle of spilled coffee on her desk and watched the colors bleed away. I stood there, my fists shaking so hard I thought my bones would snap. I wanted to scream, to tear that office apart, but I thought of the surgery. I swallowed my pride, wiped my eyes, and walked back to the site while her high-pitched laughter followed me down the hallway. The final act of tyranny happened on a Tuesday that I will never forget. The rain was coming down in sheets, and the wind was howling through the iron skeletons of the building. Maria arrived at the site with a group of billionaire investors, wearing a hard hat that had never seen a speck of dust. She saw that the main crane had stopped moving. I had ordered the operator to shut it down because the wind speeds were well above the safety limit. She marched up to me in front of all those wealthy men, her face twisted in rage. She demanded to know why her money wasn't moving. When I told her it was too dangerous to lift, she didn't just argue. She swung her heavy designer bag with all her weight, slamming it into my chest and knocking me backward into a deep pool of freezing mud. As I lay there, struggling to catch my breath, she took her steaming hot espresso and poured it directly over my head. She screamed at the top of her lungs that I was a coward, a loser, and a clerical error that should have been deleted years ago. She told me to get on my knees in the mud and apologize for wasting her time, or I was finished. I didn't get on my knees. I stood up, dripping with coffee and mud, and told her I would never apologize for keeping my men alive. She fired me right there in the rain, telling security to throw the trash out of the gate and promising to wipe my pension records so I would leave with absolutely nothing. That night was the darkest hour of my life. I sat on the curb outside the construction fence, picking up the pieces of my daughter's ruined photo from the gutter. I had no job, no money for the heart surgery, and no pension after 15 years of loyalty. I watched the local news and saw Maria being called a visionary leader. She had the world in her hands, and I had nothing but a box of rusty tools and a broken heart. For months I was a ghost. I worked odd jobs, picking up scrap metal just to buy groceries. Maria had blocked me from every firm in the city. She thought she had erased me. She thought she had won. But Maria made a big mistake. She thought I was just a man who moved heavy things. She forgot that I was the one who had set up the digital infrastructure for the firm's security. She forgot that I had kept my own black books, a detailed record of every illegal cheap material she had ever ordered and every bribe she had paid to the city inspectors. Most importantly, she had no idea about my family history. My grandfather wasn't just a mason. He was a man who had bought up the mineral rights to the land this entire district sat on. I had been sitting on a quiet, massive trust fund my entire life, waiting for a reason to use it. 6 months later, Maria held a grand press conference at the very top of the Horizon Tower. It was the opening of the decade. She was dressed in an all-white suit, standing on a stage decorated with flowers, telling the cameras how she had built this monument to progress, with her own bare hands. The crowd was cheering and the champagne was flowing. Then the elevator bell dinged. I walked out. I wasn't wearing my work boots or my stained jacket. I was wearing a tailored black suit that cost more than her car. The room went silent. Maria froze, then let out a sharp, nervous laugh. She spoke into the microphone, asking if the homeless Foreman had come back to beg for a scrap of bread. I didn't say a word. I walked straight to the podium, pushed her aside, and turned to the board of directors and the news cameras. I told the world the truth. I didn't just give a speech, I showed the evidence. I pressed a button on my phone, and the giant digital screens behind her began to play the hidden camera footage from my old hard hat. The world saw her pouring coffee on me. They heard her mocking my sick daughter. They saw the documents proving she had replaced high-grade steel with cheap, rusted iron that put every person in the building at risk. Maria started screaming that I was a liar, a thief, and a nobody. She tried to slap me, but I caught her wrist in a grip of iron. I handed her the final document, a certified notice of a majority stock takeover. I told her that while she was busy buying jewelry and mocking the poor, my investment group had quietly bought 52% of the company's shares. I wasn't the man she fired, I was the man who now owned the chair she sat in. I leaned in and whispered so only she could hear, "The trash just bought the dump, Maria. And you're the first thing being thrown out." The silence in that room was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. The police, who were already waiting in the lobby because of the safety evidence I'd sent them, walked onto the stage. They read her the charges: corporate fraud, embezzlement, and criminal negligence. As they snapped the handcuffs onto her wrists, her expensive white suit got stained with the very iron dust she used to hate. She was led away, sobbing and screaming, her heels clicking on the floorboards I had designed. I stood at the window looking out over the city I loved. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a new clean photo of my daughter. She was smiling, her heart was healthy, and her future was safe. I realized then that a tyrant can build a tower, but they can never build a foundation that lasts. Only the people with the scars on their hands know how to do that. I wasn't just a foreman anymore. I was the man who proved that justice, like a well-built skyscraper, is worth the wait.